We spoke to a security expert who says that kind of protection is a good idea, but should not be the sole security plan. Mark Quimby says helping provide true response times before a shooting can even help more.
Shots fired. People are running out of the business.
A security guard helped evacuate more than 100 people.
An alert security officer is being hailed as a hero for thwarting an apparent shooting plot.
Welcome to the Thin Yellow Line podcast. We're on episode 4. Glad you could make it. I'm Mike Hefner.
Mark Quimby.
How we doing this morning, Mark?
Doing pretty good. Starting to feel almost like fall outside for at least the first 2 hours of the day, but I think it's going to be in the high 90s this weekend.
Well,
so.
welcome. Roll Tide. Sweet home Alabama, nice and cool this time of year.
Yeah. We have about 2.5 seasons.
Well, speaking of all things country, I'm in a very good mood this morning. As I was driving into work normally, I listened to National Public Radio. Don't hold that against me. Fair and balanced, but it's this time of year in the fall where they do the membership drive, and I find that a little bit annoying, would be a term. So I had I guess it's the Bull on driving in, and someone called in and requested a little Shania. Man, I feel like a woman. I tell you what, that puts you in a good mood, doesn't it?
I guess so. Yeah. You're not dating yourself at all, though.
No, I'm not. Everybody loves some good Shania. I mean, there's no doubt in that. All right, well let's buckle down. What are we here to talk about today?
I think we're going to just swing the bat at use of force. I know it's a topic that if you have the news at your house, there's no shortage of controversy out there with law enforcement, and use of force and appropriateness of force and all of this, these kind of topics. And, when you consider that there's twice as many security officers or security professionals on duty at any given moment in the United States and there are sworn law enforcement, the exposure for use of force situations is certainly high. I mean, we're not always responding to the same types of things that law enforcement officers would be, but in terms of raw numbers, there's a lot of opportunity for security officers to get into use of force situations, or hopefully even mitigate ones that there's a high potential for them to come into fruition. And so I think it's a topic germane to kind of what's trendy in our society right now, and also one that's important to security professionals.
Yeah, and is somebody that's charged with looking after the long-term health of the business, the security business. It's also one that keeps executives up at night because it certainly can cause a financial harm, which causes all kinds of issues because of if done incorrectly, it is certainly one that comes with severe consequences, which could certainly be adverse to all parties involved, and also can be very adverse in terms of financial impact. So certainly, I'm looking at it from that lens as well as also through the lens that a security officer would have.
Right.
And it's one of those where I think when you think about it, for most people that answer the call of becoming a security professional are doing it from, hey, I want to protect and defend. I want to make sure that we have a society where there's rule of law and that we're helping make this a safe and great place to live, wherever that may be. And so when the article we were talking about earlier today in Detroit, a retail environment where shoplifters come in, steal some Jordan sweatpants and run out. The natural instinct is, I mean, I just saw a crime. I am going to intervene. I am going to fix that. I want to make sure that those sweatpants get back up on the shelf.
Right. And you're right. The kind of people that are typically attracted to private security, sometimes it's a means to an end. They want to be into law enforcement, or they're on the track to maybe, we've got a few people working for us that are waiting for a date for boot camp. They're going into the military, and we also get a lot of people from law enforcement and military who are coming from a structure of use of force that that is very different in terms of its application than what a citizen, a private citizen, would use. And so, there's that desire to get involved, to save the day, find some pathway to justice practically, and that's good intentions, but it doesn't always lead to great decisions. And so there's a ton of risk, not just for an organization. And if you're looking at contract security, there's two organizations at a minimum involved. You've got the client and you've got the security vendor, but also, there's a ton of risk for the officer himself or herself, because they're potentially putting not only their life, but their freedom on the line. We're talking about criminal charges. It's not hard to cross a line, even with the best intentions, where now you become the criminal, and potentially the state's going to look at your infraction as being more severe than running out of a store with some Jordan sweatpants.
Yeah, now might be a good time to remind our listeners of your credentials in the training realm, Mark, and then maybe we can segue into this scenario and what, based on your knowledge of the profession and your training experience, what you would have advised the security officer there at this particular Foot Locker.
Right. Well, use of force is probably my favorite topic in our industry. It's something that I've spent a lot of time researching. I have a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management and a master's degree in Criminal Justice, Advanced Counterterrorism, and Homeland Security. And anytime I was given the opportunity to research something that I chose, it was always use of force related, because I understand, coming up in this company, just how high of a likelihood that an officer could find him or herself in a situation where force is an option. And so I wanted to make sure that, as a trainer at the time, that I was dedicating myself to learning that craft and how to do it legally and ethically to the best of my ability. So, I've been a certified trainer for the state of Alabama for the Security Regulatory Board for, I guess, going on 8 years now, 7-8 years, and did it full time for quite a few years, and probably at this point mathematically have trained more people, security professionals in the state of Alabama, than anyone else under the ASRB guidelines. I hold a certification from the Force Science Institute. At the time that I graduated that course, I was the only person from the private sector who'd ever attended it. It took me 3 years to let them get me into that course. And in that class, to give you an idea what the Force Science Institute is, it's a group of psychologists and neurologists and people that are way smarter than you or I, and they've dedicated their professional lives to understanding how human beings react under parasympathetic stress, fight or flight stress, and then cater that knowledge to protecting officers, military, law enforcement, and now security to best be trained to handle what happens to you under flight or fight stress, and how to best, look at a situation where somebody was acting under those conditions and evaluating it appropriately for legal reasons. And, when I was in that class, the guy to my left was the West District commander for the Federal Marshal Fugitive Task Force, and the guy to my right was a district attorney from D.C. So it was a humbling experience, but a lot of good information. And so I've got a lot of years of both academic and professional connection to use of force. I'm a law enforcement firearms instructor for handgun, shotgun, patrol rifle, tactical shooting. I'm a chemical weapons instructor, a defensive tactics instructor, a sharps instructor. All these things are use of force related. And so at the instructor level, certainly, not just the practical application of force is something that you learn a fair amount about, but also the legal and ethical application. So this is one topic that I feel like I can speak with.
We
some
finally
authority.
found it?
Yeah, we finally found something I know about. So this is it. So,
All right. So what would you advise that this security officer should have done in this situation?
Well,
Because I'd want to go tackle him.
Right.
And before we get into the answer, in further embarrassing myself, in the late 80s, you could find me manning proudly the floor of the Gap. And I can fold some shirts, let me tell you.
I'm sure.
And this kind of thing happened all the time. We used to have these particular shoplifters that would come in, always wearing dresses, and they had the process down, how to take the clothes off the hanger, get them up under the dress and leave the premises. And I was, our protocol was called security, and I was certain security was going to go and tackle them and bring my product back.
Right. And I think that's important to point out before I answer your first question. Is that once again from a client standpoint, and not everybody, and I say client, that could just be the end user. So let's say even if you're a proprietary security professional and you work for the organization, you're duly employed by them. It could be somebody from a different area that doesn't really understand how security works and what the use of force paradigm is. And so there's an expectation on that client level or that outside the security team level that you're going to practically solve this problem. That if somebody has ran away with something, that you're going to do something about it, physically, tangibly do something about it. And that's why it's incumbent on the security professional to be the duty expert, the person in the uniform, the one that's finding themselves in that potential use of force situation and know what they can legally do, and not even lean on their own company at times to provide that training. But they're the licensed professional. They need to understand what to do in spite of the pressure of the expectation of somebody who's potentially at a higher place in the organization or a client that they're paid to make happy is asking them to do something that they shouldn't do. In the case of the running away with the sweatpants or any kind of shoplifting situation, and by the way, loss prevention is one of the highest risk factors for use of force because of that need internally and externally to do something practical about it. There's really two types of force. And I think the best way to answer this question is to lay out a foundation of understanding. There's two types of force. There's physical force and deadly force. And physical force is any force that makes contact with aggression, and it's the easiest, most simple way to define it. If someone's touching another person or attempting to touch another person with aggression, that's physical force. Then there's deadly physical force, which is any action or threat of action by one person against another that is readily capable of causing death or serious physical injury. So deadly force is then adding, serious injury or death as a legitimate potential based on that kind of contact. And so if you look at a loss prevention, shoplifting kind of situation where someone is grabbing a material and some sort of object that they don't own and darting off the premises, they have made no physical contact, with anyone. And so it's very important to understand that as defensive officers, and that's what all security professionals are in the United States of America, defensive. Law enforcement, military have offensive power. Security, like every other private citizen, has defensive power, and they can use force, even including deadly force, but they have to use it defensively, which means they are meeting force with force. It is to stop force that's being put against them or someone in their vicinity. And so in the case of shoplifting, there is no force being used. Now, it's a whole different type of crime if somebody's, with force taking an object. If somebody knocks you to the ground with a punch or whatever else, and then is trying to fish your wallet out of your pocket while they're choking you, that's a completely different situation. There is force to meet. In a shoplifting situation that just simply isn't there. And so anytime a security professional is going hands-on in a loss prevention, shoplifting situation, they are putting themselves, their organization, and whatever the client is at a great deal of legal risk because there just simply isn't that paradigm of force to meet. There is no...
So what you're just summarize, what you're telling me, if they come into my store, they steal a nice mock turtleneck or a cardigan back in my day that I was moving a lot of. But no. So they take this product, they steal it, they just hightail it out of there. They double time it out. They're running out. I can't go and tackle them.
No, you can't go and tackle them. You need to get a good description. You might follow them to get a direction.
Yeah. So that's extremely frustrating, because I'm here. I'm security. I am looking out for my company, my customer, my company, my fellow citizens. So I'm very frustrated by that. But again, it is these are legal framework that we have to work within. So what do I do?
You get a good description. You may tail a person to see where they go. I think as a security professional, we have to be very careful leaving the property. I mean, that's where who we work for. Whether you're proprietary or contract, any authority you have comes from the property owners of the property you own. So as soon as you step off that property line, you're just a person in a Halloween costume, or at least no different than any other civilian on the street would be. And so, we have to be careful about that, even in tailing. And also, if you're charging after someone who may have just simply stolen something and they're armed, but they didn't feel the need to brandish the weapon to steal it, now we're beating feet down an alleyway to chase them. Their assumption is probably that we're there to tackle them, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in a much worse situation. So we have to be careful even in the tailing, but we certainly don't need to touch them. And I'll take this a step further. I mean, in talking about frustration, you cannot defend the past, okay? Justice is what the legal system, the criminal justice system is designed to execute justice for what has happened in the past, whether that was 5 minutes ago or 15 years ago. So if I come into let's say you're a security officer, and I come on your property, you're in the parking lot, and I'm saying, hey, excuse me, sir, I'm being very non-confrontational. I'm just looking for how to get from 3rd Avenue to 17th Street, and as soon as you cut your head, I haul off and slap the taste right out of your mouth. I mean, pow, it's slobber in the air and everything. And I run 15 feet and stop. You have no legal right to touch me. You can't defend the slap I've already put on your face. Now, if you saw it coming and was able to block it and defend yourself proactively up to a certain point right there, that's a very different situation. But if I caught you slipping and slapped the slobber out of your mouth and ran 10 feet and stopped, you shouldn't tackle me.
And that's constant that we need to keep that in mind because it goes against human nature.
And that's exactly the point I was about to make. That flight or fight stress, the parasympathetic stress that we're under, you get audio exclusion, vasoconstriction, tunnel vision, all these things that are measurable that happen to every human being under that kind of stress have been there for eons, and it's there to keep us alive in the woods with the saber-toothed cat. And so when you flip into that mode, your brain's not thinking. If you haven't pre-programmed it to continue considering legal and ethical use of force, company policies, and all these things, you're going to find yourself working off instinct, and instinct is not applicable to the legality of use of force. And that's the thing that we cannot let drive an officer's action, is their just lizard brain instinct.
Well, all right, let's change the scenario. As much as I enjoy my reminiscing about my time at the Gap.
I was more an American Eagle kind of guy myself.
Yeah, I can see that. So now let's talk about maybe it's a any office space, healthcare facility, and public area. We have someone who is clearly upset about something. Maybe not happy about his medical bill, or not happy about how his spouse treated him that morning, or whatever. It's clearly hostile. Has no business being at our facility. Doesn't have an appointment with anybody. Doesn't work there. But has come in and is clearly hostile. Appears to be threatening all of the other people in the area that are supposed to be there. I'm a security officer. He's at my facility. What use of force do I have at my disposal at this point?
Well, you're describing a scenario I lived in for 6.5 years as the director of security for a medical facility. And I'll tell you what's typically present, and this ties something else we've already said back into it, is that I can assure you that as this guy is doing the wacky inflatable flailing arm tube man everywhere and shouting and hollering and probably screaming obscenities in this what would otherwise be a fairly pristine environment, everyone that's supposed to be there is looking at you as a security professional with the expectation, having no training in use of force, that you're going to pick this guy up and physically throw them off the property. But once again, you have to meet force with force. I cannot touch him in an aggressive way, which is how we define physical force, if he's not touching people or attempting to touch people in an aggressive way. So he could be in the middle of the library, the quietest environment we can imagine, screaming at the top of his lungs every profanity he's ever heard, And there is no legal right for us to put hands on him. What we can do and should do is keep the innocent people away from him, because we can probably not control where his location is. He's going to move at will. He is here in defiance of all the rules. So instead of trying to move him, we should certainly, if we have a team of people, create some sort of circle around him if possible, and not within a 10-foot circle. I'm talking about give him a wide berth if the environment allows it. Get everyone else away from him, and we should have called law enforcement as soon as we realized this guy was not going to be compliant with this. And our job at that point is to observe, report, record, and be prepared if he does take this to the next level and becomes physically aggressive, and then we have to respond. And when I say respond, we don't just check a box and say, okay, all options are now on the table. We can only use the minimum amount of force in any situation, whether it calls for physical force or deadly force, that takes away the danger they possess. So if they're punching me in the face, I need to do the minimum thing to prevent them from punching me in the face. And I understand there's a fair amount of subjectivity for what that minimum thing would be, but we have to at least be able to defend it in a court of law. And so if a guy's shoving us and we pull a nightstick out and cave his skull in, that's not defensible. And so we have to make sure that we're playing in the same box they're playing in. If they're playing in physical force box, that better be the box we're playing in, and still to the minimum degree necessary to stop their force or protect ourselves or others from their force. And then if they go into the deadly force box, then we feel that we have to meet them there, then we still need to do the minimum degree. And so what we want to be able to do is step back from a situation and have anybody, and this is where we get into Supreme Court case precedent. And Graham versus Connor 1989 is typically how deadly force is justified in a court of law. And it basically just says that your actions in the moment had to be objectively reasonable, given the information you had in the immediacy of your decision making. So we have to be able to step back from any situation, look at the force used, and the average rational, reasonable person on a jury of your peers, potentially, or at least a grand jury, look at that situation and say, look, what you did, given the information you had in the immediacy of that situation, was objectively reasonable, that you made a logical decision in estimating the threat of their force and then the most appropriate way to respond to it.
It's not easy, though, is it?
It's not easy.
And I think it's this is why we're talking about it and emphasizing it, because it's the use of force decision making is going on constantly each and every day. I mean, there are scenarios that just continue to happen every day, probably every hour of every day across the country, where those decisions are having to be made, and it's one where you don't have the luxury of time, and so you really have to rehearse these things, reinforce these things, and practice.
Yeah, when you're talking about a situation where the most appropriate course of action is going to look wrong potentially to the client, look wrong to society and what's popular in the political, sort of realities that we're living in, at least the perception that we're in, and then be wrong also to your human nature. That is a difficult thing to overcome, especially when you're under the time constraint of now. Like it's right here, right now, a decision is being made. And so there's times where the general public, with having not been presented with the reality and case precedent and the human factors and use of force, like I was talking about earlier, vasoconstriction, tunnel vision, audio exclusion, that kind of thing, they're going to look at a situation and see this person is drastically underreacting. The guy comes into the bank with a note, says, "Give me all the money," hands the teller that. The teller hands the guy $5, $6, $7, $8 grand in a bag, and he takes off running. And then the bank manager looks at the security officer and said, "Hey, that guy just robbed us. Go get him." And the security officer says, "Ma'am, I can't leave this property. I can't. There was no force. I don't care that he just ran out of here with $8 grand. There's no force to meet, and I can't. He's already across the street. I can't go across the street anyway." And so that's a situation where everybody's looking at the security officer who's doing the right thing and saying he's underreacting. Then you also could have a situation where you have an armed security officer standing on a post, let's say kind of in the environment that we're in now, my back's sort of near this wall, and I'm observing a parking lot or whatever the case may be. Somebody approaches me and they've got just a blunt object in their hand. It could be half a baseball bat or a 2x4 or something, and they're 10, 11 feet away, being menacing, threatening. Security officers telling them to stop, and they charge the guy, and he draws his weapon and put 8 rounds in his chest. And the general public's going to see that CCTV video and say, here's this armed security officer shooting this poor guy who all he had was a stick in his hand. And not understanding how use of force is legally and ethically applied, thinking that he overreacted when he did the exact right thing, with his back against a wall and an object that can kill him and no other recourse. We can't expect a person to box with an accessible weapon on their hip. He gets one stun from against the brick or with that billy club, and he's on the ground, and now not only has he lost control of his weapon, putting his life at danger, but everyone else's life is more danger because now the criminal who's willing to attack somebody has his gun.
Yeah, and you know, those escalating where there is use of force by the offender, you know, those are happening. In the news from I guess this past weekend in Payette County, wherever that is, there was a mention of where security guards, 2 different security guards. Now, I guess, you know, we need to raise the security profile of the rodeo, but a security officer was bit by a female, and then another security officer was a male attempted to choke him. So there, clearly a different scenario where there's actual force being administered on the security officer that then they've got to react to.
And I can
you're getting choked. You need to know what to do, and what to do at that point in time is different if they're running out with some sweatpants.
Exactly. I mean, that's a deadly force situation. And I'll tell you, even if you devote yourself to this kind of situation, there are potential situations out there that are incredibly difficult to know the answer to. I'll tell you one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me from a use of force situation as a security professional. It was at the hospital where I was the director of security. We had a guy who's a habitual trespasser, very aggressive with it. We get a call. We know the guy is a regular. We're basically just trying to detain him verbally by distracting him, not physically forcibly detain him, long enough for law enforcement to come and arrest him because he's had so many trespasses.
Now, why weren't you physically detaining him?
Because there's no force. He wasn't touching anybody.
Because you legally cannot.
Exactly. And so when I say detain, it's detainment through distraction. If I can talk to you long enough to get you to not leave the property, because if he leaves the property, he's just going to come back in 5 minutes and we're going to continue to deal with him. If I can keep him on the property and law enforcement shows up, they can actually nab him for trespassing. So that's what we were trying to do. And in the process, also, we know just through interactions with him, he's told us, law enforcement's told us to keep us aware because it's a dangerous situation, how aggressive he can be at times when he's high, that this guy's full-blown AIDS positive, okay? I'm about 8 feet away from him, a little closer than I like to be, trying to talk him down and get him distracted, and he just puts his hand in his mouth, bites his finger off, and spits it in my face. I mean, it was like the Matrix. I was doing this and dodging his finger flying past my face. And I've been asked a million times, what did you do? I kind of stood there shocked for a second. Thankfully, he just sat down and rocked like this until law enforcement showed up. But, you know, I get asked all the time, what do you do if somebody spits on you? That's physical contact. I mean, there's a chance that there's some bloodborne pathogen or some sort of, you know, what do you do if a guy spits his finger at you? Should I knock that guy out? I mean, you know, he's already injured himself. So there are situations like that that's incredibly difficult. What do you do if somebody spits on you?
And that's with the time and space is such the you know, and the more time you can buy yourself and the more space you can create, the more options you have.
Exactly. Space is your friend. You know, and once again, here's where human nature can get us in trouble. If you're in a situation where you're dealing with someone who's verbally aggressive, they're putting off a very hostile demeanor, all eyes are on you, and you feel like you're charged with holding the line for this property, it's hard for you to swallow your pride at times, especially if you're a type A person and somebody's moving towards you and you to step back just to maintain that reaction gap. That takes a lot of pride swallowed, and because you know instinctively that everyone around you just sees you as being afraid. You know, the guy's walking towards you and you're backing up. And, you know, in the training environment, what we used to tell people all the time is if you've got to tell yourself in your head that you're backing up to save them, not backing up to save you, so be it. You know, there's just situations, and use of force is one of them, where your pride cannot be a factor. Because pride can get you put in jail really quickly. In a situation that you may have been able to otherwise mitigate. You may have had to swallow a little pride to mitigate that, and understand that the ignorance of the people in the environment may recall this situation in an inaccurate way to the detriment of what you want your character to be perceived as. But the reality is that as long as you walk away with your health and your freedom and your job, having avoided a catastrophe, that's a win. That's a win all day, every day.
Absolutely. Yep. Now, the last kind of thing I think we might have time for, I was noticing another article in York, Pennsylvania, where they have and not looking to politicize this issue. It's just a recent article in that they have made a decision at the York School District to arm security officers. So let's talk about the fact when you're carrying and it's an armed post, how that affects the use of force dynamic.
It affects it greatly because, for one, there's nothing you can do with a firearm that isn't deadly force. And you hear people say all the time, and these are people, and there's a difference between ignorance and stupidity. Ignorance is just having never been taught. Stupidity is being taught and rejecting it. So you hear people and their ignorance say, well, why didn't the cop just shoot him in the leg? Or why don't you just shoot him in the foot? As though like, okay, we're going to step it down a little bit and we're going to just shoot him where it hurts him. Well, remember the definition of deadly force. Any action or threat of action by one person against another that is readily capable, didn't say guaranteed, readily capable of causing serious injury or death. So anything that a person does to another person that is readily capable of causing serious injury or death is deadly force. So I don't care if I shoot you in the pinky toe. Something tells me that that would feel pretty serious. I've never had a volunteer who said, well, why don't we just shoot him in the foot? Say, well, let me cut your pinky toe off with this pocket knife and see if it feels serious. They all agree that it's serious. So that's deadly force. It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do with the firearm that's not deadly force. So it's incumbent upon armed officers to understand that I can't deploy this firearm in any other situation other than the application of deadly force. There's no place on a person's body I can shoot around that isn't a deadly force situation. And so we should only be using these tools in deadly force situations. But it changes the dynamic even deeper than that. Let's say I'm an unarmed officer, okay? And I'm standing in a huge wide parking lot. Let's say it's empty, it's at the middle of the night, and I'm just walking across this parking lot to get to another coverage area to do a patrol. And a trespasser is on the property. I've challenged them. They refuse to leave. They're now walking towards me. I'm walking backwards, trying to maintain my reaction gap. And let's say they're 15, 20 feet away, and all of a sudden they just take off sprinting at me. Let's say they're wearing Speedos. There's no weapon. And if you've been around, some areas at night, you see some goofy kind of folks. So that this is possible. The guy's in flip-flop and Speedos. We know he's not brandishing a weapon anywhere. And he's charged me 15 feet away. I'm an unarmed officer.
But he's not asking for directions to the pool?
No. He's fist-balled, and it's all on. He's charging, and we know that he's charging to assault us. I'm in a position now where I have to make a decision. Do I turn and run? Do I feel like I can outrun this guy? Is there a place I can get to? Can I run long enough to get, based on my stamina and the environment, to get another security officer here to have a battle buddy or something like that to hopefully dissuade them or at least, tip the numbers in our favor? Or if I don't think I can get away from him, basically what I have to do is stop and hey, look, this thing's happening. It's going hands-on to defend myself. I'm now going to have to... it's either going to at least be a physical altercation, if not a deadly altercation, depending on how they're fighting. If in that same, so that's what the worst case scenario. I stop and I stand my ground. I get in the Marine Corps fighting stance and say, here it all comes. That same exact situation with an armed officer, same parking lot, same bad guy in the Speedo, everything else being equal. But I have a firearm. When that guy charges me, if my brain tells me you're not going to get away from him, you don't even have the stamina, or you don't have the environment, or you don't have the space, whatever the case may be, he's already too close. If you know you can't get away from him, you're now drawing that firearm. And you're desperately hoping as you give that last command that brandishing that firearm is going to make him change his mind and stop. That's not why you did it. Because what I can't do now is just stop, get in the Marine Corps stance, and duke it out with this guy. Because once again, as soon as he can reach me, he can reach my weapon. And I owe it to myself and every other potential person in this environment to not lose possession of this weapon. Because if he's willing to attack me, we have to make the illogical assumption that he's willing to attack anyone with whatever he has at his disposal. Right now, he has a Speedo in his fist. But if I take one on the chin or get knocked to my back and I lose this physical altercation, which I have no guarantee that I can win, doesn't matter what their physical body looks like, male, female, doesn't matter. I can't guarantee that I'm going to win this altercation. All of a sudden, there's a firearm in play, and it's not in my hands anymore. The firearm I brought to the property, I'm no longer in possession and control of its ethical and legal use. So now I've drawn this firearm on an unarmed person who's charging me, desperately hoping as I give commands that they stop. And if they don't, there's an imaginary line where I can't guarantee maintaining possession of this weapon anymore. And you're potentially going to find yourself as an armed officer firing upon an unarmed person because they pose a deadly force threat to you as soon as they touch your weapon. You're now fighting, and statistics show you've got a 50-50 at best shot to come up with this weapon. And so that's just, we should not expect anybody, civilian, law enforcement, military, to roll the dice on a 50-50 shot of them going home at the end of the day. We've done everything we can do. We asked the guy to leave. He charged us. We brandished a weapon, gave him a command, and if we pulled the trigger at the last possible moment to make sure that they did not gain possession of the weapon, that's a legal application of deadly force, even though that other person's armed and running across the parking lot with a flip-flop and Speedo. To go back to your question, that situation would never have existed. That decision would have never existed without the firearm present. What made it a deadly physical force encounter and the immediacy of that guy's proximity to the officer was the fact that the officer had a weapon. And I'm not saying that to say that we should never have a firearm on an officer by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, maybe that guy unarmed doesn't go home because he get his head smashed into the concrete.
Right.
The idea that deadly force can only be used with weapons is faulty but prevalent.
Yeah, and I think, again, not to politicize and I have no idea of what was the background of the York PA, but I suspect that the action is in response to active shooter, and so now you have that as a tool on site, but it brings in all of these other dynamics when you've got two teenagers that get in a fight and the security officer's charged with breaking up the fight and he's got a weapon, or he or she has a weapon, changes the math.
Right, yeah, and what it would do for me, if I'm that officer at a school with a firearm, I'm that much less likely to physically intervene in an altercation
Right,
because of the
rightfully
threat
so.
I bring with me. And that's why it helps to have more than one officer on the scene, because you may have someone who can quickly disarm themselves to another officer in a safe and effective way, and then can physically intervene. I mean, there was even, when I was in the military, there was even times in Iraq where we were processing people in Fallujah, and I would be in the crowd of people with no firearm on me because it was just too dangerous for me to be around 200 people that are potentially hostile to me. There was no way I was going to win anyway, so it'd be better off to not lose the weapon to them. And so we would have who we called archangels watching, and that would be a way that you would handle that at a school, is teams of people. If we get called to the scene of a fight, then two officers show up, one armed, one unarmed, and so that they can handle both situations. Once again, security officers, security professionals are, as all civilians, are defensive in their application. And so having tools like tasers, subject control spray, pepper spray, batons potentially, firearms, these kind of things, these are all tools that are just helping us in a defensive scenario. They should never be used, right, unless the situation calls for them. So the way that we handled the additional risk by bringing these things to the property has to be through training, retraining, understanding, and just the inline user approaching this profession as what it is, and that's a profession. And there's a high level expectation, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it matches the wage all the time. There's a lot of people out there that if you listed out the responsibility that they carry on their shoulder, there's not a lot of people that want to take that responsibility for the wage they're making. And you could say the same thing about law enforcement and military.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is a topic that we'll, in this podcast, we'll revisit on numerous occasions. It's at the core of the profession, and I think it's one of the aspects of the profession that makes everyone that's in the Thin Yellow Line it's such a noble profession, and why we're here trying to highlight the work that goes on by the security officers each and every day, because you're having to make these decisions and apply the training and work within a framework that is certainly difficult. And I think, we see it frequently, but we don't highlight it enough, how professional and how well the security officers out there are playing defense and reporting and doing an exceptional job on remaining alert and collecting information to be proactive in that defense each and every day. And it's it's hard work, and it's a high stakes poker out there.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate that this is just kind of the nature of the beast, but you never hear about, or very rarely hear about, the situations that were mitigated. I mean, how many times everyone hears about the shootings, everyone hears about the fights that go really bad, but I mean, we'll never know how many times a day security officers are in a situation that if it wasn't for their verbal judo, if it wasn't for their de-escalation or professionalism, maintaining a reaction gap, would have taken that step into a national news situation. And they're preventing these things, and I believe, on a daily basis. Because of their dedication to the craft, and there's no parade for them, there's no discount at Golden Corral. They're just doing it because, obviously, for self-preservation is part of it, but because they're trying to do the job the best way it can be done, because they understand that it's significant and there's a lot of responsibility that if they don't carry that line, if they don't toe the line, that things are going to get bad. So I'm glad that we're doing this to recognize, and I think it's. We should recognize all the good decisions, even though we can't put them on a spreadsheet or can't point to them specifically. That security professionals, for the most part, are out there making lots and lots of good decisions, because if they weren't, the 1.2 million of them out there, we'd hear a lot more about them.
There's a lot of Speedo guys and a lot of incident reports that are handled appropriately that we don't know about. So I think they're tired of hearing you jabber.
I'm tired of hearing me jabber.
All right. Well, thanks, Mark.
Yep. We'll
right,
see y'all next time.
And for the outro music, can we have a little Shania?
Not a snowball's chance in a microwave.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Thin Yellow Line podcast. Find us on YouTube by searching Thin Yellow Line Podcast or on your favorite podcast hosting site. See you next time.